December 18, 2023. West Tennessee State Penitentiary. The heavy steel gates groaned open, flooding the frozen ground with the first rays of morning light. A man stepped forward. His breath curled in the cold air, his face lined with years lost behind concrete walls. Darius Coleman was free. 17 years had passed since the night that changed everything. 17 years since the blood of an innocent woman and child had stained the quiet streets of Memphis. 17 years since a father, once known for preaching about faith and redemption, stood in a courtroom and watched a judge sentence the man who destroyed his family. Now, that same father was waiting. Pastor James Carter. He had stood at the back of that courtroom all those years ago, silent as the gavel fell. He had listened as the word guilty echoed through the halls. He had watched as the man in shackles was led away. And then, he had done something no one expected. He did not cry. He did not pray. He did not speak of forgiveness. Instead, he whispered a single sentence as the prisoner passed him by. "I'll see you when you get out." No one thought much of it at the time. A grieving husband. A broken father. Words muttered in grief and exhaustion. But today, as Darius Coleman took his first steps into freedom, a car idled across the street. The driver's hands gripped the wheel. The engine hummed softly beneath the weight of time and rage. The man behind the wheel had been waiting for this moment longer than he had ever preached a sermon, longer than his own daughter had been alive. Darius had served his sentence. He had done his time. The justice system had deemed him fit to re-enter society. But as he moved toward the bus station, unaware of the eyes tracking his every step, one question remained. Was 17 years long enough to erase what he had done? Or had his sentence only just begun? This is In the Shadows of Crime. Subscribe now, because this story is just beginning. Memphis, Tennessee. 2006. A city known for its rich history, the sound of blues drifting through Beale Street, the soul of its people woven into every corner. But beneath the rhythm and resilience, there were cracks. In some neighborhoods, trust ran deep, generations of families watching out for one another, doors left unlocked, children playing freely in the streets. Yet, change was creeping in. Crime had begun to settle like dust in the places it was never meant to reach. And on one December night, it would find its way into a home where love, faith, and family should have been enough to keep it out. Pastor James Carter was a man of unwavering faith, his voice filling the halls of Empty Zion Baptist Church every Sunday, his sermons known for their power, their passion, their promise of hope. His wife, Vanessa Carter, was just as beloved, a teacher at the local elementary school, the kind of woman who remembered every child's name, who believed that kindness and patience could change lives. Their daughter, Layla, was 12, with a smile that could light up any room. She sang in the church choir, wrote stories in her notebook, and talked about becoming a lawyer one day. "I want to help people, Daddy," she would say. They were a family deeply rooted in their community, a family whose life revolved around faith and service. A family who had no reason to believe that their world was about to be ripped apart. December 17, 2006. 8:45 p.m. Inside the walls of Empty Zion Baptist Church, Pastor Carter's voice rose and fell with the rhythm of his sermon. The congregation listened, heads nodding in agreement, voices murmuring "Amen" as he spoke of redemption, of grace, of the power of forgiveness. It was a message he had preached many times before. He did not know that at that same moment, 7 miles away, his wife and daughter were preparing for Christmas. The tree in their living room was glowing with warm, golden lights. Layla had just finished wrapping a gift for her father. She had saved up her allowance to buy him a new leather-bound Bible. Vanessa had just poured herself a cup of tea, sitting down to grade papers at the kitchen table. And then, a scream. One neighbor heard it. Just one. A single, piercing sound that sliced through the still night air. And then, silence. No follow-up. No cries for help. Just an eerie, unnatural quiet. It wasn't enough to raise the alarm. The Carter family was well loved, and no one could have imagined what was happening behind that closed door. By the time Pastor Carter pulled into his driveway just after 10 p.m., the street was quiet, the lights inside his house still on. But the front door was open. It wasn't wide. Just a crack. A sliver of darkness where there should have been warmth. He stepped inside, calling out his wife's name. No answer. He called for Layla. Nothing. The cup of tea sat untouched, now cold. The Christmas lights still twinkled. The scent of vanilla candles lingered in the air. The house was silent. And his family was gone. December 18, 2006. 6:30 a.m. The sun had barely begun to rise when the call came in. A jogger had found something in Shelby Farms Park, just a few miles away. 2 bodies. The park was beautiful in the daylight. A place where families came to picnic, where children played, where people walked their dogs. But in the early morning cold, it had become something else entirely. Vanessa Carter lay in the grass, her body still, her face peaceful in a way that did not belong to death. She had been strangled. A few feet away, Layla. Her tiny frame was curled inward, as if she had fought to protect herself, her small hands covered in bruises. Her cause of death was the same, asphyxiation, but she had also suffered a severe head injury. A blunt force trauma, the kind that suggested desperation. The kind that meant she had fought. There was only one clue. A single fingerprint. Left on Vanessa's car door. And in that moment, the search for a killer began. The investigation begins. The moment the bodies were found, the investigation became a race against time. Homicide detectives from the Memphis Police Department arrived at Shelby Farms Park before dawn, their breath visible in the cold air, their eyes scanning the scene for anything that could tell them what had happened in the final moments of Vanessa and Layla Carter's lives. The evidence was scarce. There were no witnesses, no security cameras in the area, no clear signs of forced entry at the Carter home. The neighborhood was quiet that night, too quiet. No one had seen anyone coming or going. No one had heard the struggle inside the house. But there was one clue, the fingerprint on Vanessa's car door. The print was rushed to the lab, officers watching anxiously as technicians ran it through the AFIS database. It didn't take long. A match. Darius DJ Coleman. 19 years old. A familiar name. Pastor Carter knew him. So did the church. The suspect. Darius had been a kid from the neighborhood, a boy who had come through the doors of Empty Zion Baptist Church more times than anyone could count. He had sat in the pews, listening to Pastor Carter preach. He had attended Sunday school, joined in on youth programs, even shared meals at the Carter family's table. For a while, it seemed like the church had been his refuge. He had grown up in a broken home, a father in and out of prison, a mother struggling to make ends meet. The pastor had tried to guide him, to pull him away from the streets, to give him a place where he felt safe. But something had changed. By the time Darius turned 17, he had started running with the wrong crowd. Petty theft. Fights. Suspensions from school. He had stopped showing up to church. Stopped answering Carter's calls. The kid who had once seemed lost, but salvageable, had disappeared into a world the pastor could no longer reach. And now, his name was on a murder investigation file. But could he really have done this? When detectives brought Darius in for questioning, he sat slouched in the metal chair, hands cuffed, face blank. He didn't look afraid. He barely looked concerned. For hours, they pressed him. Asked him where he had been that night. If he knew Vanessa. If he had ever been inside the Carter home. He denied everything. Then they showed him the fingerprint evidence. His expression changed. Just for a second. The officers watched closely, waiting for his next move. He leaned forward, voice lower now, muttering that he had nothing to do with what happened. "Then how did your print get on her car?" He didn't answer. The detectives kept pushing, until finally, he said something they didn't expect. "I didn't do it alone." A moment of silence. The air in the room shifted. Was there someone else? If so, where were they? And why was Darius willing to talk about it now? The trial, March 2007. The case moved fast. The evidence against Darius Coleman was damning. His fingerprint was on Vanessa's car door. His DNA was found under Layla's fingernails, proof that she had fought back. When police searched his apartment, they found Vanessa Carter's purse tucked inside his closet. There was no logical explanation. No reason his print should have been at the scene. No reason he should have had Vanessa's belongings unless he had been there when they were taken. The jury didn't take long to decide. Darius's defense tried to claim he had been forced, that someone else had been involved, someone he was afraid to name. But no evidence ever surfaced to back up his story. No accomplices. No mysterious second suspect. Just Darius. And the verdict was clear. Guilty. The judge's voice was steady as he read the sentence. 17 years. 2 counts of homicide. No possibility of parole. Vanessa and Layla were gone. And now, so was Darius. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. The courtroom was packed that day. The air was thick with grief, with the weight of a community that had lost 2 of its own. Friends of the Carter family sat in silence. Church members whispered prayers under their breath. And Pastor James Carter, he sat alone. He had barely spoken in the months following the murders. He had buried his wife. He had laid his daughter to rest. He had stood in front of his congregation, trying to find the words to bring them comfort, but the words would not come. People had expected him to forgive. To stand before them and speak of redemption. To offer the same grace he had preached for years. But he remained silent. And when the verdict was read, when Darius was led past him in handcuffs, Pastor Carter leaned in close. And he whispered, "I'll see you when you get out." December 18, 2023, West Tennessee State Penitentiary. The morning air was sharp and cold, cutting through the rows of barbed wire that crowned the prison walls. The heavy gates groaned open, their rusted hinges announcing the moment that had been 17 years in the making. Darius Coleman stepped forward. He inhaled deeply, the first breath of freedom he had taken since the night his world changed. His skin had hardened under the weight of prison life. His hair was now short, his face leaner, more weathered. He was no longer the reckless 19-year-old who had walked into court all those years ago. He blinked against the morning sun, squinting into the horizon like a man trying to remember what the world looked like beyond steel bars and concrete walls. He had served his time. The state had decided his debt to society had been paid. But just across the street, one man disagreed. A black SUV sat parked along the curb, its dark windows masking the face of the man behind the wheel. Pastor James Carter. He had been there for hours. Sitting. Watching. Waiting. His hands rested on the steering wheel, fingers tightening and loosening, tightening and loosening. The engine hummed softly beneath him, but he made no move to get out. Darius had spent the last 17 years watching over his shoulder, sleeping with one eye open, wondering if today would be the day someone came for him. That day had finally come. The days leading up to Darius's release had been uneventful. Quiet. Too quiet. Then, a Facebook post. The words appeared on Pastor Carter's page, simple, chilling, and final. Some sins go unpunished. Not this one. It was vague. Easy to dismiss as the words of a grieving man, still mourning a loss that time had not softened. But to those who knew him, who knew what had been taken from him, who had seen the way his silence hardened into something unmovable, they knew better. Pastor Carter had never remarried. Never moved from the house where Vanessa and Layla had once lived. He had continued preaching, his voice still strong in the pulpit, but the man behind the sermons had changed. 17 years was a long time to sit in anger. A long time to plan. And when security footage surfaced, grainy, black and white images from a South Memphis gas station, it told a story that few were willing to acknowledge. It showed Pastor Carter alone. Hooded sweatshirt. Eyes downcast. He walked into the store, bought a bottle of water, some snacks, and something else. The cashier later recalled that he paid in cash, his voice barely above a whisper. She remembered his face, though. She said she had seen that kind of look before. Determined. Cold. Final. But no one knew exactly what he had purchased. And no one asked. Darius Coleman knew how to disappear. Or at least, he thought he did. The moment he stepped out of prison, he followed the plan he had rehearsed 1,000 times in his mind. Lay low. Avoid old neighborhoods. Don't contact anyone from the past. Get out of Memphis as soon as possible. But plans fall apart when someone is already waiting for you. He booked a rideshare, climbed into the back seat, exhaling slowly as the car pulled onto the highway. He didn't know that the SUV followed from a distance. He didn't notice the same headlights in the mirror, always a few cars back. He didn't see the way the driver's hands clenched the wheel, his jaw set, his eyes locked onto a target he had waited nearly 2 decades to face. The ride lasted 20 minutes, taking him to the one place he felt safe, an old friend's house in South Memphis. The street was empty when he stepped out, pulling his hood over his head. He glanced up and down the block. Nothing. Then, a sound. A footstep. Slow. Deliberate. Measured. Darius froze. He turned just in time to see a figure step from the alley. Pastor Carter. The streetlight overhead buzzed softly, casting shadows over the older man's face. He wasn't the same man Darius had last seen in a courtroom. His shoulders were broader. His stance heavier. But the eyes? The eyes hadn't changed. They were the same ones that had burned through him at his sentencing. The same ones that had followed him every night in his sleep. Darius took a step back. The pastor didn't move. Seconds stretched between them, long, suffocating, unbroken. Then, Carter's voice, low, calm, and cold. 17 years. Darius swallowed. He knew there were only 2 ways this night could end. And neither of them involved walking away unscathed. What happened that night? The streetlight flickered. A soft hum filled the silence between them. Darius Coleman stood frozen, his breath shallow, his muscles tense. Pastor James Carter didn't blink. His hands remained at his sides, his stance unwavering. There was no rage, no trembling fury, only a presence that was heavier than words. 17 years. 17 years to think. To wonder. To imagine this moment, over and over again. Darius took a step back. Then another. His instincts told him to run. But the man before him, the one who had once called him son, the one who had once tried to save him, was no longer the same. The story of what happened next splits in 2. The first version, whispered in hushed tones throughout Memphis, is the one that people feared. They say Carter grabbed Darius by the collar, his grip vice-like, the strength of a man who had carried 17 years of grief. They say he forced him into the SUV, the doors locking with a quiet finality. They say Darius didn't fight, that maybe, deep down, he had known this day would come. The car moved through the darkened streets, past abandoned buildings and quiet storefronts, the roads nearly empty. The same streets Darius had once walked as a teenager, the same roads that had led him down a path he could never turn back from. But this drive had a destination. Shelby Farms Park. The place where Vanessa Carter had taken her last breath. The place where Layla had tried to fight back. The place where a husband and father had stood 17 years ago, staring down at the bodies of the two people he loved most in the world. The same place where he now stood again, this time, with their killer in front of him. They say he made Darius kneel. They say he whispered something before reaching into his coat. They say there was a gun. A shot. Then, nothing. No body was found. No evidence of a struggle. Only the quiet rumor that justice had finally come full circle. But is that the truth? The second version is different. Colder. They say Pastor Carter never laid a hand on him. They say he only stood there, watching, letting the weight of silence do the work for him. They say he looked Darius in the eye and said just 3 words. You are mine. Not a threat. Not a promise of violence. Something worse. They say Carter didn't want Darius dead. He wanted him to live in fear, every second of every day. To never know if tonight was the night Carter would come back. They say he let Darius walk away. But he would never truly be free. Because from that moment on, every shadow in the corner of his eye, every footstep behind him, every unfamiliar face in a crowd, he would always wonder. Had Carter finally come for him? What is truth, and what is just a story? No one can say for sure. Because days later, Darius Coleman disappeared. His apartment was abandoned. His phone disconnected. No friends, no family, no goodbyes. Gone. No records of a bus ticket. No job applications in another state. No body. Memphis PD opened an investigation, but there was nothing to go on. No witnesses. No leads. No evidence. And only one person had been seen speaking to him that night. Pastor James Carter. Police questioned Carter. They brought him in for questioning. He sat across from them, calm, unmoved. The detectives had seen that look before. A man who knew something. A man who would never say a word. They asked him where Darius had gone. He smiled. They asked him if he had anything to do with it. He leaned forward, his voice as steady as it had been in the pulpit for 20 years. Justice comes in many forms. No charges were filed. There was no evidence. And when Carter walked out of the station that night, he did not look back. Darius Coleman was never seen again. Maybe he ran, afraid that Carter would come for him. Maybe something darker happened. Maybe justice had been served in a way the courts never could. Or maybe, just maybe, some sins never truly go unpunished. 17 years. 17 years of waiting, watching, remembering. 17 years for a man of faith to decide what justice really means. But was this justice, or was it something else? Did Pastor Carter do what the system couldn't, or did he cross a line that should never have been touched? And if it were you, if someone took everything from you, what would you have done? Would you have waited? Would you have forgiven? Or would you have made sure they never walked free again? We want to hear your thoughts. Did Pastor Carter make the right choice? Or did he become the very thing he once preached against? Drop your answers in the comments below. Let's talk about it. And if you want more stories that leave you questioning everything, subscribe to In the Shadows of Crime. Because justice isn't always what it seems. And sometimes, the real story is the one left untold.